where we'll now focus on sustainability. And this will go through a presentation by KGBS, which is Kenya Green Building Society. I would like to welcome Azmina, who is the chairperson of the society, and Roy Githaiga, who is a board member and a technical lead at KGBS. Welcome. Please, let's take the least time possible. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having us, and thank you for introducing the topic when it comes to affordability. I think that is one of the main reasons why we're here. All protocols observed. I would like to respect our CEO who's in the room, Nazra Nanda, our founding partners, FSD Kenya, and who have helped us deliver this product to the rest of the, to the environment, and all our partners, BuildX, all the other partners, our consultants, and the likes of IQSK. Now, the analysis of the ABMTs of affordable housing, and I think before I begin, I will put a timer before Azmina gets my head. So the analysis of the ABMT program, as we have designed it at KGBS, came from a point of knowledge or a point of research, going on the ground and actually collecting this data. And this is through the work that we did we have worked with our consultants on the ground who have, I think notably one of them have over 40 years of experience in collecting data on ABMTs. And something that I would like to talk about ABMTs, for instance, in terms of an introduction, it's an alternative building material and technology. However, at KGBS, we also broke it down to appropriate building materials and technologies and also emerging building materials and technologies. And that is one of the things that you will see on the ABMT program that we have on our website. You can actually go to our website, kgbs.co.ke, to see the ABMT handbook that we have designed within KGBS. And I think I will just move along from that. So, sorry. What do ABMTs actually do? So one of the things that we looked at in terms of our key findings and key outcomes is that it opens doors to a wealth of creative solutions to the housing crisis. So we've talked about, and it's been introduced about when you start talking about affordability, and Alan has probably actually introduced it, is that it's also very contextualized, right? So we need to start looking at different options and different types of materials when we start talking about the housing crisis, and that is one of the reasons why ABMTs do provide innovative building solutions to that. It also enhances energy efficiency. You've heard a lot about IFC Edge, which is one of the toolkits that we've partnered with IFC to deliver that toolkit, and we use that as a baseline understanding of what these materials are. And on the handbook itself, you will see that we actually do talk about embodied carbon throughout all the materials that we have addressed, or we have tried to give some research and some work into it. Also, resource conservation and management, with a potential 40% reduction in resource production, which is, we need to actually start talking about resource efficiency when it comes to the extraction of these materials and how they actually do enhance or try to affect the housing crisis. With that, that is the handbook in retrospect. That's what we came up with. And it offers a lot of information on the materials and technologies we have. We've had the privilege to review some of these materials as people have, especially with local communities. When we went on the ground, we really worked with local communities in certain counties around Kenya to get this information, and we partnered with IQSK in getting the costs as per material. And for this, what we did is we created a baseline of how we can actually work out these costs, because there's no one way that we can actually get these costs as without a baseline. So what we did is that we created a typology that allows the work to be done to create a better understanding on the differences on the costs and other parameters such as production impacts and policy considerations. So using this typology, we reviewed all the materials, how they can be used, how they can be extracted, and on the ABMT handbook, we actually have the information on some policy considerations to these materials. We also have the production impacts. We also have best use cases of these materials, whether they can be used as infills or how the structure can be done, whether it's a single story, double story, how they can actually be utilized and used. So these materials and technologies have the potential to revolutionize how we build and also reform the ways we affect our local communities positively. And by adopting these technologies, we essentially better local communities by no longer confining them to conventional construction methods, but also allows them to use their inherent knowledge to build better. And that is one of the those are the baselines that we decided to use, because we cannot effectively, when you start talking about cost and affordability, we're basically talking about our local communities. And we cannot rightfully talk about trying to solve the affordable the housing crisis without talking about our local communities. And that is what we generally focused on. So we do have certain materials that we looked at, like interlocking soil blocks, rammed earth, which is a very vernacular material, cross-laminated timber, which is an emerging material, and burnt bricks, which is also a very traditional type of material that we've used. So a lot of this information is available on our website. However, the reason why I mentioned these four is because a lot of these materials are either done as an emerging or it's a community-based production. So you have to, we went on the ground and we actually saw some of these materials being done. And communities around actually said that we need to have these things or these type of materials being implemented because it gives job creation. It has enhancements, it has production enhancements, especially to local communities. Some of the innovations that we have in terms of the materials, when you visit our website, again, and I will continue saying that, please visit our website. You will have access to the report, which allows you to see the tangible reality that comes with the adoption of ABMT in the construction industry. And this is also coming from a point of knowledge. I'm trained in architecture, so this is also coming from a point of necessities around the construction, around the design of buildings. And that is also why we designed a baseline that we can also attack these type of materials and make sure that we are using the same baseline to create the same type of narrative, or at least a narrative around all the materials that we've reviewed. So again, we talk about affordable housing. That is one of the things that we are trying to do. So what do? Try to look at how it impacts different communities. Now, of course, we are still limited with the type of information that we can get sometimes, whereas depending on where we go, because we can't be everywhere, but as KGBS we're trying, we have a very robust youth chapter, and we're also trying to help, or rather we're trying to empower them into getting us a lot of this information around where they live. So this is the type of information that we're trying to gather from local communities around. So affordable housing initiatives are therefore not just a theory, but a reality through these adoptions of ABMTs. So we look at the enhancements on affordable housing. We also look at how it empowers urban planning. We talked a lot about urban planning yesterday. Job creation to local communities, because this is also something that they were focusing on a lot, or rather we've been focusing a lot, and environmental stewardship and social cohesion, especially when it comes to the adoption of ABMTs. So one of the major things that we also need to look at effectively, and I will also you will have access to these slides. I know I'm running because of time. However, we need to start talking about efficient resource management. There's nothing we can do when it comes to ABMTs. There's nothing we can do when it comes to the extraction of materials without a focus on efficient material sourcing. And that is whether it's the extraction, whether it's the management of these materials, and the extraction of it, and how you use it. So I think with that, I will also still insist on the word efficient. I think many people do, we like to have this notion that we can design something beautiful and we can use different materials for that matter and whatnot. But we also have to have this form of efficiency. And with that, I would like to introduce Azmina to take us through the next stage of this. But thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Roy. Good morning, everyone. And I'm not very good with formalities, so all protocols observed. I'll just get started on this. So what Roy talked about right now about resource efficiency is a good segue into what I want to talk about. And that's the elephant in the room, which is embodied carbon. And I'll get to why I say it's the elephant in the room. So Africa, I mean, I'm going to repeat some things you've already heard yesterday and will continue to hear throughout this conference, but Africa has the fastest urbanization rate in the world. Urban population is expected to double by 2050, and 60% of those people will be living in urban areas. 80% of the buildings in Africa are yet to be built. And that is going to create an exponential demand for building materials. African construction waste is expected to rise to 516 million tons per year. And 90% of that, if we're going to continue with business as usual, is going to end up in uncontrolled dump sites and landfills, and then be burned and create more pollution, right? So embodied carbon actually has a very significant impact on global greenhouse emissions. And yet, despite that massive contribution, it's been largely ignored up until recently. So I'm going to talk about where we're going to go from here. Again, everybody knows, everybody's seen this before as well. Buildings are responsible for about 39 to 40% of global greenhouse emissions. And 11% of that is basically embodied carbon in materials. So if it's only 11%, why would we want to worry about it? Oops, sorry. Let me take you back. So this is why we want to worry about it. First of all, the carbon footprint of a building includes both operational carbon, which is what we've been focusing on for the last few decades, reducing the energy consumption, the utilities consumption in the buildings, and the embodied carbon piece, which has been addressed to some degree, but has not been given the attention it needs to be given, is related to basically the extraction, production, transportation of materials, manufacturing, and the whole life cycle of carbon, all the way to demolition and either reuse or recycle, or its end-of-life state where it just is treated as waste. And that's a big component. So as buildings become more energy efficient and resource efficient with respect to operational emissions, the use of water, the use of energy, then the proportion, so currently the proportion is about 75% on the on the operational emissions and 25% on the embodied carbon emissions. But that's now going to change to where embodied carbon is becoming far more significant as far as the proportion. And the problem with that is that whereas operational emissions are sort of dispersed over the life of the building, which could be anywhere from 50 to 100 years or even longer, the embodied carbon is spent right up front, and it's fairly significant. And so, we need to tackle that problem, because that's what's going to be emitting most of the emissions as we continue to build, and especially in Africa, where we're going to be building significantly. So our carbon budget, sorry, I can't read this from here, but our carbon budget between now and 2050 is 420 gigatons. We are actually spending, or we're actually, using more than that by almost 300%. We're going to be using 1,325 gigatons by 2050, right? And as I said, oh, thank you, that helps a lot. Yeah, so to reduce this spending spree, we have to be reducing emissions now. And our biggest opportunity to do that is with the embodied carbon, because that's where our biggest spend from a built environment perspective is going. So basically, this kind of the embodied carbon proportions in the different building elements. And as you can see, structure has the largest, followed by the building envelope and then interiors. So if we're going to be reducing significant embodied carbon, these are the areas that we'd want to focus on. And here are some of the ways that we can do this. And again, I'm going to go back to what Roy said about resource efficiency, right? So low carbon materials is one way to do this. And we can talk about, like, for instance, right now, 90% of buildings have concrete, steel, and aluminum, right? If you were able to use recycled materials, for instance, if you could use scrap to recycle into steel and aluminum, the scrap materials from steel and aluminum, you would be reducing the embodied carbon by 60 to 80%. The same goes with cement, for instance. Cement, the major component of cement is clinker. And clinker is 10% of the mass of cement, but it's literally 90% of the greenhouse. It's responsible for 90% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So if you can substitute the clinker, for instance, there's now new technology called LC3. Well, it's not technology, it's material that you're mixing into the cement. LC3 is limestone, calcined clay, something. Sorry. But that reduces the embodied energy of cement by 40%, right? And it's 25% cheaper than using some of these other materials that we currently use. So those are some of the ways that you can reduce. The other way is to efficient construction. Again, efficiency, modular, precast. There's less waste. It's quicker to construct, and therefore, again, lower embodied carbon. Regenerative design, and this is where you start using biogenic materials, biophilia, and other sustainably sourced materials for your design of your project. And then the other one is lightweight construction. Again, reducing the amount of material that goes into the building. Another one is just reuse and repurpose existing buildings. Don't build new, right? And as I said earlier, that if you're able to reuse and retrofit existing buildings, again, you'll save a lot of embodied emissions. The average is about, well, not the average, the range is about 50 to 70% savings in your embodied energy from repurposing a building as opposed to building new. Compact shape and form, again, that's just reducing material. Durability, again, this would extend the life of the building. And because embodied carbon is addressed or assessed as a whole life cost, the longer the life of the building, the more of a reduction in emissions per year is what you end up with, right? Flexibility again ties back to being able to reuse the materials you've put into your building, repurpose them, recycle them. So also waste minimization is a big issue because, again, waste is also included in the embodied carbon assessment. So all of your construction waste, your end-of-life waste, your demolition waste, your replacements of parts and equipment, all of that waste is included in your embodied carbon footprint. And so as much as you can minimize that, you can lower your carbon footprint. And as Roy mentioned, the biggest thing is we need to do local sourcing. Local sourcing of materials will reduce your transportation costs. They're not as big a percentage as your processing emissions, but it makes a difference. Every little bit makes a difference. There we go. And the last one is just what we've been doing all along, is reducing our energy consumption and water, and again, waste. So in closing, and I'm sorry I've had to rush through this, but I'm just going to basically finish up by saying that, again, the important thing to note in reducing carbon is we just need to reduce the quantity of materials that we use, and we need to be selecting low carbon materials. And this needs to start at the very, very early stages of your project. You can't wait until decisions are made on material selection before you start looking at that carbon footprint. You've got to start looking at it from the beginning, and your material selection has to be a choice based on your carbon budget that you're establishing for your project, your target that you want to achieve for your project, right? So that's a really, really important consideration. And with that, I think I'll just stop there and hand it back, and I hope I'm on time.